everybody, thank you for tuning in to watch my video. So this video, I'm going to give you guys a quick introduction on this paper. So Corte focuses primarily on the third approach, which is the psychosocial approach. He focuses more on this approach because the other two approaches have been widely researched for the past decades, and he wants to shed some more light on this approach. The other two approaches are the macro-sociological and the psychological. I'm going to quickly summarize these other two approaches, and then I'm going to give you guys a clear explanation on why these other two approaches do not solve or provide clear explanations for these terrorist groups. And then once I am done with that, I'm going to dissect more of Corte's 7 principles. So the macro-sociological approach. Researchers have veered more to this approach because they tend to view terrorism as a mirror of social dysfunctions and conflictive trends in the social system. So in other words, if you view this approach with considerable causes like poverty, authoritarian and repressive regimes, or cultural and religious practices, this in turn causes riots, it causes street protests, and it causes revolutions, civil wars, and international armed conflicts. The psychological approach. This approach is the most popular in terms of identifying disruptive or psychopathological behaviors and personalities. Researchers have tried to investigate terrorists by their tendencies for violence and their inability to control their aggressive motivations. But nonetheless, these impetuous acts of aggressiveness are not common they're not common traits among terrorists. And people who join terrorist organizations do not have the same motives and personalities. Almost everyone in these organizations will have different traits, and pretty much everybody's unique. And although these members have different traits, it's hard for researchers to dissect every member's psychological profile because of the lack of information that's provided to us. Therefore, the information that is given to us is based on higher-ranking individuals in these terrorist organizations. Now that there is a better understanding of these two approaches, it can be concluded that neither of these approaches can provide a clear explanation on why certain groups become involved in terrorism, like certain people become involved in terrorism. For this reason, the psychosocial approach has become a more popularized method for better understanding these individuals. The first principle of Corte's psychosocial approach is that terrorism must not be seen as a syndrome, but as a method of social and political influence. In a social psychologist's view, one's environment heavily influences one's behavior and psychological predispositions. Also, it's important to note that many of these influential processes are done in a very intentional and strategic way. Frequently, many terrorist organizations use the means of advertising to promote their cause. Another key point, and this is a direct quote from Cortes's paper, and it says, "Many minority groups conduct terrorist activities as a way to bring about social change. These terrorist groups speak for beliefs and positions on political and religious views. And according to the research conducted by social psychologists, these minorities try to persuade others to join their cause." And lastly, the first principle exemplifies the importance of the relationship of terrorism and propaganda. The second principle. The attributes of terrorists are shaped by processes of social interaction. Corte undoubtedly believes that the activities and lifestyles of terrorists grow inside these terrorist organizations. It shapes the mentality of its members, and it increases their commitment to their selected organization, and it arranges them to be involved in criminal activity. And such examples are the Red Brigades in the Irish Republic Army. The third approach is that terrorist organizations can be analyzed by analogy with other social movements. We dive into this principle with the psychosocial effects and relationships to social identity. Most often, terrorist groups want to seem like the preserver and defender of the values of these ethnic or religious communities. If these terrorist groups are seen as a large portion of their community, then it will aid them to fulfill their cause and their goals. And under this principle, the psychosocial effects of your relationship and social identity to your community include depersonalization, it includes social cohesion, it includes conformity and obedience, and a bipolar worldview. There is going to be a chart that I will link to Canvas. The fourth principle is terrorism is only possible when terrorists have access to certain resources. So in essence, the success of a terrorist organization depends on the availability of the resources that the organization has. And obviously that can occur in almost any organization. And these groups, they require money, they require technology, and they require supporters to help grow their cause. However, in order to attain these resources, terrorists must engage in criminal activities, and such activities includes theft from a bank and kidnapping. And in order to obtain members, terrorist groups use methods of radicalization. They do recruitment strategies, and they do training programs. The fifth principle. The decision to begin and sustain a terrorist campaign is always legitimized by an extreme ideology. People who have the same views as a terrorist organization will show a greater cause, a greater potential for the cause. Most likely the new members will be willing to exhibit hateful and violent crimes. And research has been conducted concerning the nature of the ideologies of different terrorist groups. And in this research, there is evidence that shows that there's at least 5 different elements that are shared by these ideological discourses or conversations. And I will link that chart as well on Canvas. The sixth principle. Every terrorist campaign involves strategic goals, but the rationality which terrorists apply to their violence is imperfect. I'm going to use a direct quote from the paper. It says, according to the most influential theoretical model in contemporary social sciences, individuals, organizations, and social movements usually behave like rational actors. Rational actors, in essence, are people that maximize their usefulness in order to attract more members. The last principle is that the activity of terrorists partly reflects the internal features of their organization. Corte believes that there exist at least 2 kinds of qualities in which affect a terrorist group's activities. The 2 qualities are organizational structure, and the second is the dynamic of the way that these terrorist groups work, so the way that they function. To conclude, Corte's goal in this paper was to provide more clues from a psychosocial approach to explain terrorism. This paper also provided suggestions to future research for some critical key issues like the socio-political environment, the relationship of religion and terrorist organizations, and the process of recruiting members, the functionality of the organizations, and the ideological principles of the community. That is it for this video. Thank you.